The small diner on the outskirts of town was unusually quiet that evening. It wasn't the kind of place you'd find in glossy magazines or travel blogs. No fancy chandeliers, no Instagram-worthy dishes plated with artistic flair. Just a humble eatery with worn vinyl booths, faded wallpaper, and a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked properly since the 90s. But for Sarah, it was home. Well, not literally, but close enough. She spent more hours here than anywhere else, serving coffee to truckers passing through, taking orders from locals who treated the diner like their second living room, and occasionally listening to strangers spill their hearts over plates of greasy fries. Sarah had been working as a waitress for nearly 6 years now, ever since she dropped out of community college to help her mom pay medical bills. Life hadn't exactly handed her a golden ticket, but she didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything, and besides, Sarah liked to think of herself as someone who made the best of what she had. Her co-workers called her the glue, because she always seemed to hold everything together. The chaotic lunch rushes, the grumpy customers, even the occasional kitchen meltdown when the fryer acted up. If anyone needed a pep talk or a shoulder to lean on, they knew Sarah would be there. That night, though, things felt different. The diner was emptier than usual, save for a couple of regulars nursing cups of black coffee at the counter and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. Outside, rain drizzled steadily, creating soft tapping sounds against the glass panes. The weather matched the mood inside. Quiet, somber, almost heavy. Even the neon sign above the entrance flickered weakly, casting a pale glow over the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was around 8:30 p.m. when the door creaked open, letting in a gust of damp air along with a tall figure wrapped in a dark hoodie. He hesitated just inside the doorway, shaking droplets of rain from his jacket before stepping further into the warmth of the diner. Sarah glanced up from wiping down a table and offered him a quick smile. "Evening," she said brightly. "Take a seat wherever you'd like." The man nodded but didn't respond verbally. Instead, he chose a booth tucked into the far corner away from the other patrons. Something about him stood out immediately. Not his appearance, which was unremarkable enough. Jeans, sneakers, scruffy beard. But his demeanor. There was a weight to the way he moved, slow and deliberate, as if each step required immense effort. His shoulders slumped slightly and his eyes darted toward the window, where streaks of rain painted abstract patterns across the glass. Whatever was going on inside his head, it clearly wasn't good. Curious to spite herself, Sarah grabbed a menu and headed over to his table. Up close, she noticed how tired he looked. Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally drained. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his hands rested limply on the table, fingers drumming absently against the formica surface. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was guarded, almost wary, as though expecting judgment or pity. "Hi," Sarah began cheerfully, sliding the menu onto the table. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" He blinked, once then twice, as if snapping out of a trance. Tea, please," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. "Hot tea." "You got it," Sarah replied, jotting down the order. Before turning to leave, she added, "Let me know if you need anything else, okay?" For the next 10 minutes, Sarah kept an eye on him while tending to her other tasks. He barely touched the steaming mug of tea she brought him, instead staring out the window like the world beyond held some secret he couldn't quite decipher. Every so often he'd glance down at his phone, scrolling aimlessly before setting it aside again. Whatever was troubling him, it was clear he wasn't ready to share it. Not yet, anyway. But Sarah had a knack for reading people. Over the years, she'd learned that sometimes all someone needed was a little nudge, a signal that they weren't alone. So when her shift slowed down and she found herself with a rare moment of downtime, she decided to approach him again. "Mind if I join?" "You?" she asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. When he shrugged non-committally, she slid into the booth, folding her apron neatly in her lap. "I'm Sarah, by the way." His gaze flicked up briefly. "Alex," he replied, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Well, Alex," Sarah continued, leaning forward slightly, You seem like you've got a lot on your mind tonight. Care to talk about it or not? I mean, no pressure. Sometimes talking helps, though. To her surprise, Alex didn't brush her off. Instead, he sighed deeply, running a hand through his already messy hair. It's complicated, he admitted, after a pause. Just stuff, stuff piling up. Sarah nodded sympathetically. Yeah, I get that. Life has a way of doing that sometimes. Want to tell me more? Or we can talk about something else entirely, whatever works for you. For a moment, Alex hesitated, his fingers tracing invisible lines on the tabletop. Then slowly he began to speak. At first his words were hesitant, fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the table. But as Sarah listened patiently, nodding and offering gentle prompts, he gradually opened up. He talked about feeling stuck, about losing people he cared about doubting whether he was cut out for the path he'd chosen. He didn't reveal specifics, at least not many, but the weight of his emotions filled the space between them, tangible and raw. Throughout their conversation, Sarah did what she did best. She listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything, didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. Instead, she shared bits of her own story, weaving in moments of hardship and resilience to remind him he wasn't alone. By the time Alex left an hour later, leaving behind a generous tip and a quiet thank you, he seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing his burden, even briefly, had eased the load. Watching him walk out into the rain, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting had been significant. Little did she know, it was only the beginning of a story far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The next afternoon, Sarah found herself with a rare moment of downtime. After a busy lunch rush, the diner had settled into its usual mid-afternoon lull, a quiet stretch where customers were few and far between. She used these moments to recharge, often leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee or scrolling through her phone while waiting for the next wave of orders. That day, however, something felt different. Maybe it was the lingering memory of Alex from the previous night, the way he'd opened up to her even if just a little, or maybe it was the rain that had finally stopped, leaving behind a crisp freshness in the air. Whatever it was, Sarah couldn't shake the sense that today would be interesting. As she scrolled absent-mindedly through social media, a headline caught her eye. F-22 Raptor makes emergency landing at regional airport. The words jumped off the screen, grabbing her attention like a magnet. Curious, she clicked on the link and began reading. According to the article, an F-22 Raptor, a sleek, state-of-the-art fighter jet, had made an unscheduled landing at Tiazite, the nearby regional airport, earlier that morning due to unspecified technical issues. While such landings weren't unheard of, they were rare enough to make local news. What truly stopped Sarah in her tracks, though, was the accompanying photo. In the image, a pilot stood beside the massive aircraft, his helmet tucked under one arm as he spoke with ground crew members. He wore a flight suit, its olive green fabric, contrasting sharply with the gleaming silver of the jet behind him. But it wasn't the uniform or the jet itself that made Sarah's breath catch. It was the man's face. Squinting at the screen, she leaned closer, her heart skipping a beat. It couldn't be, could it? Her mind raced back to the previous night. The disheveled stranger in the hoodie, slouched in a corner booth, nursing a cup of tea and pouring out fragments of his soul. There was no mistaking it. The pilot in the photo was Alex. Sarah sat frozen, for several long seconds, staring at the screen as if trying to will the image to change. How could this be? The Alex she'd met last night hadn't exactly screamed fighter pilot. Sure, he'd been polite and thoughtful once he warmed up, but there had been nothing about him that hinted at such a high-stakes, larger-than-life profession. Fighter pilots were supposed to exude confidence, authority, and precision, not sit silently in diners looking like the world was crushing them. Her thoughts spiraled as she reread the caption beneath the photo. Captain Alexander. Hartley, United States Air Force. Captain? Sarah blinked, then read it again. So not only was Alex a pilot, but he was also an officer, a leader among leaders. The revelation hit her like a freight train. Who was this guy? And why had he ended up at her diner of all places looking so lost and broken, unable to process everything at once? Sarah decided to dig deeper. She scrolled through the comments section of the article, hoping to find additional details. Most of the posts were typical internet fare, people speculating wildly about what might have gone wrong with the jet, others praising the pilot's skill and bravery. One comment, however, stood out. Captain Hartley is known for his calm under pressure. If anyone could handle an emergency landing, it's him. Calm under pressure? Sarah chuckled softly to herself. If those commenters had seen Alex last night, they might have thought differently. The man she'd spoken to had seemed anything but calm, more like someone drowning in uncertainty, grasping for lifelines. Yet here he was, less than 24 hours later, standing tall beside a multi-million-dollar aircraft, embodying the very definition of composure. The more Sarah thought about it, the more surreal the situation became. Had Alex deliberately chosen the regional airport because it was close to the diner? Was it mere coincidence that he'd landed near the same town where their paths had crossed? Or, and this possibility sent a shiver down her spine, had he come back for her? Shaking her head, Sarah tried to dismiss the last thought as ridiculous. Why would a fighter pilot care about some random waitress who'd listened to him vent for an hour? Still, the idea lingered, refusing to let go. She glanced around the diner, half expecting Alex to walk through the door at any moment. When the bell above the entrance remained silent, she sighed and returned to reality, reminding herself that life rarely worked like a movie plot. But the seed of curiosity had been planted. By the time her shift ended that evening, Sarah knew she couldn't just leave things as they were. Something about Alex's story, the contrast between the man she'd met and the hero in the photo, compelled her to learn more. And so, instead of heading straight home, she made a detour. The regional airport wasn't far from the diner, just a 15-minute drive along winding country roads. As Sarah pulled into the parking lot, she felt a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling in her chest. What exactly was she hoping to accomplish by coming here? Would Alex even remember her? And if he did, what would she say? For all her outward confidence, Sarah wasn't used to chasing answers, or people. This was uncharted territory for her. Parking near the terminal, she stepped out of her car and took a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and wet grass, a reminder of the storm that had passed through earlier. She walked toward the fenced-off observation area, where spectators often gathered to watch planes take off and land. A handful of people milled about, snapping photos and chatting animatedly, but none of them looked familiar. Then, just as Sarah was beginning to think she'd made a mistake, she spotted him. Alex was standing near the fence line, gazing skyward with an expression that was equal parts wistful and contemplative. He wasn't in his flight suit anymore. Instead, he wore jeans and a simple jacket, blending in seamlessly with the crowd. Yet there was no mistaking his height, his posture, or the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. For a moment, Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. Then, as if sensing her presence, Alex turned his head. Their eyes met, and recognition dawned instantly. His lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across his features before giving way to a small, tentative smile. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice carrying a note of amusement mixed with something else. Gratitude. Perhaps, Sarah laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect to find out you're a superhero," Alex chuckled, shaking his head. "Hardly a superhero, just doing my job." They stood there for a beat, neither speaking until Sarah gestured toward the jet visible in the distance. "So, emergency landing, huh? Everything okay?" He nodded, his expression softening. "Just a minor issue, nothing serious. We're running tests now, but it should be good to go soon." "That's good," Sarah replied, though her tone suggested she was thinking about something else entirely. After a pause, she added, "You know, when I saw your picture online, I almost didn't believe it was you." Alex raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Why's that?" She shrugged, smiling sheepishly. I don't know. You didn't strike me as the fly fighter jets for a living type. And what type did I strike you as? He asked, tilting his head slightly. Sarah considered the question for a moment. The kind of person who needs someone to talk to sometimes, like everyone else. Her honesty caught him off guard, and for a second, Alex looked almost vulnerable again. Well, he said finally, you weren't wrong about that. The two of them shared a quiet laugh, the tension easing as they settled into conversation. Slowly, Alex began to explain why he'd landed at this particular airport and why he'd felt drawn to return to the diner where their paths had crossed. Each word he spoke painted a clearer picture of the man behind the uniform, revealing layers of complexity that Sarah hadn't anticipated. By the time they parted ways, Sarah realized something important. Heroes aren't always who we expect them to be. Sometimes they're ordinary people hiding extraordinary lives, and sometimes they show up in the most unexpected places, like a sleepy diner on a rainy night. Sarah's heart raced as she stood there face to face with Alex at the airport. The man who had seemed so lost and burdened just hours earlier now appeared calm and composed, almost like a completely different person. Yet, despite the drastic change in his demeanor, there was still something familiar about him. It wasn't just his voice or the way he carried himself. It was the vulnerability that lingered beneath the surface, a quiet reminder of their conversation the night before. I didn't expect to see you here, Alex repeated, breaking the silence between them. His tone was light, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity in his words. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with a mixture of amusement and intrigue. Did you come just to check on me? Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She hadn't planned this visit carefully. It was more of an impulse, driven by a mix of curiosity and concern. But standing there now, looking into Alex's eyes, she felt compelled to be honest. Not exactly, she admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear nervously. I saw the article online about your landing and, well, I guess I wanted to make sure everything was okay. Alex nodded slowly, his lips curving into a faint smile. That's kind of you, he said softly. But I'm fine, really. Just a minor hiccup with the jet, nothing too serious. Still, Sarah pressed gently, it must have been stressful, landing unexpectedly like that. I can't even imagine. For a moment, Alex didn't respond. Instead, he turned his gaze back toward the F-22 Raptor sitting silently on the runway in the distance. The sleek aircraft gleamed under the late afternoon sun, its sharp lines and powerful presence a stark contrast to the modest surroundings of the regional airport. To most people, it would look like a machine, a tool designed for speed and precision. But to Alex, it was more than that. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked for, everything he believed in. It's part of the job, he said finally, his voice steady but tinged with reflection. Things don't always go according to plan. You learn to adapt, to stay focused no matter what happens. He paused, glancing at Sarah. But honestly, yesterday made me realize something important. What's that? Sarah asked, tilting her head curiously. That sometimes even someone like me needs a reminder of why we do what we do. Alex's words were simple, yet they carried weight. He looked down briefly as if gathering his thoughts, then continued. When I walked into that diner last night, I wasn't in a great place. I've been dealing with stuff that makes you question whether you're cut out for the life you've chosen. And then you sat with me, listened to me, reminded me that it's okay to feel lost sometimes. That meant more to me than you probably realize. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his sincerity. She hadn't thought twice about comforting him. It was second nature to her, something she did without expecting anything in return. Hearing Alex put it into words, though, made her realize the impact of her actions. I'm glad I could help, she murmured, her cheeks flushing slightly. But honestly, I didn't do anything special. Sometimes, people just need someone to listen. You'd be surprised how rare that is, Alex replied, his voice softening. In my line of work, everyone expects you to be strong, unshakable. There's not a lot of room for vulnerability. Last night, you gave me space to breathe, to let some of that weight go, even if only for a little while. The two of them fell silent again, the hum of distant airplane engines filling the air around them. Sarah glanced at Alex, noticing the subtle shift in his expression. He seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing his thoughts had lifted another layer of the burden he'd been carrying. It struck her then how much courage it must have taken for him to open up, not just to her but to anyone. Fighter pilots weren't supposed to doubt themselves, were they? They were supposed to embody strength and confidence, to inspire awe and admiration. Yet here was Alex, standing before her, proving that even heroes had moments of weakness. After a beat, Sarah gestured toward the jet on the runway. "So, tell me something," she began, changing the subject slightly. "Why did you choose this airport? I mean, there are bigger bases nearby. Why land here?" Alex chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Technically, it was the closest option when I noticed the issue with the jet, but..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting back to the diner visible in the distance. "Let's just say I had another reason for coming back." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Oh?" He nodded, his smile widening slightly. "After last night, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about how much your kindness meant to me. I figured if I had the chance to thank you properly, and maybe explain a few things, then I should take it." Her stomach flipped at his words, though she tried to play it cool. "You didn't have to do that," she said quickly. "Really. Like I said, I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Maybe not from your perspective," Alex countered, his tone earnest. "But from mine, it was exactly what I needed. Timing's funny that way, isn't it? One moment you're feeling completely lost, and the next, someone shows up and reminds you that you're not alone." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. She wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such heartfelt gratitude. Most days she went about her routine without expecting recognition or reward. Helping others was simply part of who she was. But hearing Alex acknowledge her role in his journey made her feel seen, valued, important. "So," she said after a pause, trying to lighten the mood, "does this mean you're going to invite me for a ride in that thing someday?" She pointed toward the F-22, grinning teasingly. Alex laughed, shaking his head. "I wish I could promise that, but let's just say it's not exactly standard procedure. Still..." He hesitated, his smile turning mischievous. "If you ever want to see one up close, I might be able to arrange something." "Now, that sounds like a deal," Sarah replied, laughing along with him. For the first time since arriving at the airport, she felt truly relaxed. The initial awkwardness of their encounter had melted away, replaced by an easy camaraderie that neither of them had anticipated. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Alex glanced at his watch. "I should probably get back," he said reluctantly. "They'll be finishing up the tests soon, and I need to make sure everything's good to go before we head out." "Of course," Sarah agreed, stepping back to give him space. "Thanks for talking to me, and for clearing up the mystery of the emergency landing." Alex smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." With that, he turned and began walking back toward the hangar, where technicians were already preparing the jet for departure. Sarah watched him go, her mind racing with questions and emotions. Who was this man, really? How did someone balance the immense responsibility of piloting a fighter jet with the everyday struggles of being human? And most importantly, why did it feel like their meeting was far from over? Standing there alone, surrounded by the hum of activity and the distant roar of engines, Sarah realized something profound. Connections could form in the unlikeliest of places. Sometimes, all it took was a single act of kindness, or a rainy night in a quiet diner, to change the course of someone's story. As the days passed, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Alex. Their unexpected meeting at the airport had left an indelible mark on her, stirring emotions she hadn't anticipated. She replayed their conversation in her mind, the way he'd opened up to her, The gratitude in his voice, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him despite his vulnerability. It was surreal to think that someone like Alex, a fighter pilot, a captain in the United States Air Force, had found comfort in something as simple as her listening ear. But what stayed with her most was the realization of how much weight he carried beneath his composed exterior. Pilots like Alex were often seen as larger-than-life figures, almost superhuman in their abilities and resilience. Yet here was proof that even heroes struggled, doubted themselves, and needed support, just like anyone else. Sarah felt honored to have been part of his moment of clarity, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story, and perhaps more to their connection. A week after their encounter, Sarah received a text message out of the blue. The number wasn't saved in her phone, but the name attached to it sent a jolt of recognition through her. Alex Hartley. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. "Hey, it's Alex. Just wanted to say thanks again for everything. Hope you're doing well." Sarah stared at the screen for a moment, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to play it cool, to keep things casual and light. But another part, the part that had grown increasingly intrigued by this enigmatic man, wanted to dive deeper. After a few seconds of hesitation, she typed back, "Hey, Alex." "Of course, no problem at all. How's the jet holding up?" His reply came almost instantly. "Good news. It's ready to go. Turns out it was just a minor glitch. Nothing too exciting." "That's great to hear," Sarah wrote back, smiling to herself. Glad everything worked out. For the next hour, they exchanged messages back and forth, their conversation flowing effortlessly. They talked about everything from their favorite foods — Alex admitted he had a weakness for greasy diner burgers, which made Sarah laugh — to their shared love of old movies. Slowly, the initial awkwardness of texting someone new began to fade, replaced by a sense of ease and familiarity. By the time they finally signed off for the night, Sarah realized she hadn't smiled this much in weeks. Over the following days, their communication continued. Texts turned into phone calls, and soon, Sarah found herself looking forward to hearing Alex's voice each evening. He told her more about his life as a pilot, the thrill of flying at supersonic speeds, the camaraderie among his fellow officers, and the sobering responsibility of protecting others. In turn, Sarah shared stories about her own world, the challenges of working long hours at the diner, the joy of connecting with customers, and her dreams of someday pursuing photography as a career. Their conversations revealed two very different lives intersecting in ways neither of them could have predicted. For Alex, talking to Sarah was a grounding experience. Her perspective reminded him of the importance of staying connected to the real world, beyond the high-stakes environment of military aviation. And for Sarah, learning about Alex's experiences opened her eyes to a side of life she'd never fully understood. Despite their differences, they discovered a surprising amount of common ground: values like kindness, perseverance, and the belief that everyone has a story worth hearing. One evening, during one of their calls, Alex broached a topic that had been on his mind. "Hey, Sarah," he began hesitantly. "I've been meaning to ask, would you be interested in visiting the base sometime? I know it's not exactly a typical outing, but I'd love to show you around, introduce you to some of my crew, maybe give you a closer look at the jets." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Visiting an Air Force base? It sounded both thrilling and intimidating. She'd always imagined such places as highly secure, regimented environments where outsiders weren't welcome. Yet the idea of seeing Alex in his element, surrounded by the machines he flew and the people he worked with, intrigued her. "I don't want to put you out or anything," she said carefully. "I mean, is that even allowed?" "It's not every day we get visitors, but it can be arranged," Alex replied, his tone reassuring. "You'd have to go through some basic clearance procedures, but nothing too complicated. If you're comfortable with it, I think you'd enjoy it." Sarah hesitated, weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, the opportunity was incredible, a chance to step into a world most people only saw in movies or read about in books. On the other hand, she worried about overstepping boundaries or making things awkward between them. Finally, curiosity won out. "Okay, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Let's do it." The day of the visit arrived sooner than Sarah expected. Dressed in jeans and a comfortable sweater, she drove to the base early in the morning, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. When she pulled into the parking lot, Alex was already waiting for her, dressed in his flight suit and looking every bit the confident officer she'd seen in the photo online. As he approached her car, his face broke into a warm smile. "You made it," he said, opening her door for her. "Ready for a little adventure?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, stepping out and returning his grin. "Just promise me I won't get arrested for trespassing." Alex laughed, shaking his head. "No promises, but I'll do my best to keep you out of trouble." He led her through security checkpoints, explaining the process as they went. To her relief, the guards were polite and professional, waving them through after verifying her identification. Once inside, Sarah felt a mix of awe and intimidation as she took in her surroundings. The base was vast, filled with rows of hangars, maintenance crews bustling about, and jets parked neatly along the tarmac. The air buzzed with activity, a constant hum of engines and voices blending together. "This place is amazing," Sarah murmured, craning her neck to take it all in. "It feels like stepping into another world." "That's one way to describe it," Alex said, chuckling. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the team." Over the next few hours, Sarah met several members of Alex's squadron, each of whom greeted her warmly and answered her endless questions with patience and humor. She learned about the intricacies of maintaining an F-22 Raptor, marveled at the technology packed into its sleek frame, and even got to sit in the cockpit, though Alex assured her it was only for photos, not flight. Every detail fascinated her, but what struck her most was the sense of camaraderie among the crew. Despite the seriousness of their mission, they treated each other like family, supporting and teasing one another in equal measure. By the time the tour ended, Sarah felt a newfound respect for the men and women who dedicated their lives to serving their country. But more than that, she felt grateful for the glimpse into Alex's world, a world that until recently had seemed impossibly distant from her own. As they walked back toward the parking lot, the sun setting behind them, Alex turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "So," he said, "what did you think?" Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with genuine admiration. "I think you're even more impressive than I realized. This whole thing, it's incredible. Thank you for letting me see it." Alex shook his head modestly. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to share this with someone who understands." They stood there for a moment, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. For Sarah, the visit had been more than just a tour. It was a reminder that connections could transcend boundaries, bridging gaps between worlds that seemed impossible to cross. And for Alex, it was proof that even in the midst of chaos and duty, moments of humanity could shine through, reminding him of why he chose this path in the first place. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah and Alex's connection continued to grow stronger. What had started as a chance encounter in a quiet diner had blossomed into something neither of them could have predicted, a friendship that gradually deepened into something more meaningful. They came from vastly different worlds. Sarah, grounded in the simplicity of small-town life and her daily routines at the diner. Alex, soaring through the skies as part of an elite group of pilots tasked with protecting their country. Yet, despite these differences, they found common ground in their shared values and mutual respect. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Alex's job kept him constantly on the move, whether it was training missions, deployments, or sudden calls to duty. There were days when Sarah wouldn't hear from him for stretches of time, leaving her to wonder where he was or if he was safe. But whenever he returned, even if only briefly, he made sure to reach out, to let her know he was thinking of her, to remind her that she mattered. And Sarah, for her part, understood the demands of his profession. She didn't resent the sacrifices required by his career. Instead, she admired his dedication and commitment to something greater than himself. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah arrived at work to find the diner buzzing with unusual energy. The regulars were gathered near the windows, cups of coffee in hand pointing excitedly toward the sky. Curious, she followed their gaze and froze. In the distance, an F-22 Raptor roared overhead, its sleek silhouette cutting through the clear blue expanse. It wasn't uncommon for military aircraft to fly over the area. After all, the regional airport was nearby. But this felt different. Something about the timing, the precision of the jet's maneuvers hinted at intentionality. Before she could process what she was seeing, the bell above the diner's door jingled loudly. Heads turned as Alex walked in, dressed casually but unmistakably commanding attention. He scanned the room briefly before spotting Sarah behind the counter. His eyes lit up, and he offered her a sheepish smile. "Surprise," he said simply, shrugging as though landing a fighter jet just to visit her was the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her jaw dropping slightly. Then, unable to contain herself, she burst into laughter. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, shaking her head in disbelief. "You flew here? For breakfast?" "Well, technically, I landed here because of routine maintenance," Alex replied, his grin widening. "But yeah, pretty much." The entire diner erupted into applause, the customers clapping and cheering as though they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Someone shouted, "Tell us your story," while another called out, "Is she your girlfriend yet?" Sarah's cheeks flushed bright red, but she couldn't stop smiling. Later that day, after the excitement had settled and the lunch rush had ended, Alex approached Sarah during one of her rare breaks. "Can we talk?" he asked softly, his tone unusually serious. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside to give them some privacy. "What's up?" Alex hesitated, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she'd come to recognize. "I wanted to explain why I did this today," he began, gesturing vaguely toward the window where the jet still gleamed under the afternoon sun. "It wasn't just about surprising you. Well, okay, maybe a little. But mostly it was about saying thank you." Sarah tilted her head, confused. "Thank me? For what?" "For reminding me of who I am," Alex said earnestly. "That night in the diner, you didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. And yet you took the time to listen. You reminded me that no matter how high I fly or how far I go, I'm still human, that I need people too. And honestly, I don't think I realized how much I needed that reminder until after I met you." His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Sarah swallowed hard, touched by his sincerity. "Alex," she said gently, "you don't have to thank me for that. Anyone would have done the same." "No," he countered firmly. "Not everyone would. Not everyone does. Most people see the uniform, the jet, the title, and they assume I've got everything figured out. But you saw me. Just me. And that changed everything." Sarah felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined not to cry. "You're incredible, you know that?" she murmured. "You save lives, protect people, do things most of us can't even dream of doing. But I think what makes you truly special is that you never forget what it means to be human." Alex smiled, faintly, reaching out to take her hand. "And you remind me of that every single day." Word of Alex's visit spread quickly through the small town. By evening, the diner was packed with locals eager to catch a glimpse of the pilot who'd landed just to see a waitress. Some brought cameras, others flowers, and a few even homemade pies as tokens of appreciation. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter, stories, and heartfelt gratitude, not just for Alex but for Sarah as well. To celebrate, someone suggested throwing an impromptu gathering outside the diner. Tables were dragged onto the sidewalk, twinkle lights strung between lampposts, and a makeshift stage set up for speeches. When the crowd quieted down, Alex stepped forward, holding up a glass of sparkling cider. "I didn't plan any of this," he admitted, glancing around at the sea of smiling faces. "But I guess that's fitting, because none of it was planned. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? A year ago, I never would have imagined standing here tonight, surrounded by such kindness and generosity. All because one person decided to care." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening. "Sarah, you inspire me, not just with your strength, your humor, your heart, but with the way you see people. You remind me that heroes aren't defined by uniforms or medals. Sometimes they're ordinary people doing extraordinary things, one act of kindness at a time. The crowd erupted into cheers again, chanting Sarah's name as tears streamed down her face. She hugged Alex tightly, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. For once, she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt seen, valued, and celebrated. As the night wore on, Sarah reflected on how far she'd come since that rainy evening in the diner. Back then, she'd been focused on surviving, on getting through each shift, paying the bills, keeping her head above water. Now she realized that survival wasn't enough. Through Alex and through the connections they'd built together, she'd discovered a deeper purpose: to make a difference, however small, in the lives of others. When Alex finally had to leave, later that week, promising to return as soon as his schedule allowed, Sarah knew their story wasn't ending. It was evolving. Though their paths might diverge at times, they'd always carry the lessons they'd learned from each other. That vulnerability is strength, that listening is powerful, and that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can change the course of someone's life. Standing outside the diner as Alex's jet disappeared into the horizon, Sarah smiled to herself. Heroes weren't born, they were made, shaped by the moments that tested them and the people who believed in them. And in her own quiet way, she realized she was becoming one too.